Walk with me through the cellar door.
A storm is coming, Francis.
A portal to a more skeptical world.
Cellar Door Skeptics begins right now. Prepare for the revolution with your hosts, Christopher Tanner and Chris Hanna.
It's February 2015 at Hampton Court Palace in London. 12-year-old Holly Hampshire grabs her iPhone to take a picture of her cousin Brooke as she walks alone through the majestic King's apartment. Snap! It's not until the following day that they discover Brooke was not alone in the picture. A tall, gray, seemingly cloaked woman follows behind her. In a second photo, this strange anomaly is gone. Was it a stunning image of a tortured apparition making a rare performance on the camera? Or was it something else? Something a little bit more sensible? Welcome to the Halloween edition of Cellar Door Skeptics. This is our 5th episode, and we thought we'd do something a little bit lighter tonight. We thought we'd start with a story, something to creep you out a little bit. And I thought, hey, what the hell not? Let me grab my co-host, Mr. Chris Hanna, and drag his ass along for a funny yet skeptical approach to ghosts and horror stories. Welcome, Chris Hanna, to the show tonight. How are you today, sir?
Doing pretty good, man. We're hanging out in the dark over at your house. It's a pre-Halloween party time, basically. And this is one of my favorite times of the year. It's also a lot of fun looking into like weird stories and stuff because it's cool to see some new stories, but sometimes something new comes through that I've never seen before. And like this picture there's a picture of that that ghost story or that image on the BBC that we'll probably have in the link, and that's creepy, man. I've never seen this picture before, and it's pretty freaky. Immediately, my first thought is Photoshop or whatever, because it's so easy to do that. But if it's not, that would be pretty definitive, because it's not just like a fuzzy picture. This is pretty clear stuff.
Yeah. And so for everybody listening, you could grab the link right out of the description. I threw it in there. I wanted to kind of start off with something intriguing. So photography, ghost photography, is something that's always interested me. It's something that I kind of participated in before I became a big skeptic and an atheist. And it's been something that I don't know if you want to call ghost hunting, or I used to call it ghost observing because of my whole karma thing, right? I didn't want to say I was hunting ghosts. I wanted to observe them because I don't want to hunt them. I didn't want to kill them. I wanted to observe them. So for me personally, in the horror holiday, I love ghosts. Ghosts have always fascinated me. And I found this article that talked about photography because I'll tell you what, I have pictures. I do, and we'd have to dig them out of my closet. But I have pictures of stuff that you would go, that's fucking crazy. Is that a ghost? Is that not? And, you know, I have a buddy, my friend Zombie Joe, who I talk about all the time, as it is. But my buddy Zombie Joe, him and I used to go ghost observing. That's what we used to do. And I have a personal horror story that I'll tell that I think I told on Atheist Analysis, but I don't remember or not because we were pretty drunk last year for Halloween. So, but we used to do this all the time. And so personally, for me, the ghost side of Halloween has always fascinated me. It's probably a relation to, you know, how I grew up, what I believed in, but it also kind of redefines the culture. So we wanted to start the whole show out tonight because we have a lot of great stuff. On a light note, but at the same time, be as serious as we can.
Well, yeah, as serious you can get about ghosts. I mean, it's one of those things that they search for, they look for, they try to find, and when I see it, I'm always skeptical. It's like, oh, you got some white noise or some static on your little transistor radio there, or like you said, you got some pictures. You're like, what is that? What is? It's so easy to manipulate things, so I'm always skeptical. I've never personally experienced anything, so personal experience isn't something that I can do, but when I see these things, like, it's interesting, I guess, to a certain degree. But when it comes to all of that surging to paranormal stuff, I usually just shake my head. Like when you're chasing the Sasquatch, it's reminds me of Patton Oswalt. It's like, you need to respect their beliefs. No, you don't. We have an uncle who believes he talked to Sasquatch. We do not believe him, nor do we respect him. Like that's the whole kind of thing that when I like the ghost hunting stuff, it's cool, but I guess the big thing for me is not scientific enough, possibly, but it's still pretty nifty.
Yeah. And, for me, I grew up personally, not believing in ghosts. And my mom hated Halloween. Halloween was a big thing, but it wasn't because of the fact that she enjoyed the ghoulish aspect. But I grew into that. That was something I started to enjoy growing up as a kid. I love the ghoulish aspect. I love ghosts. Some of my favorite movies are, 13 Ghosts. Love that movie. Just think it's an awesome movie. I still watch it. I introduced my wife to that 2 years ago. She'd never seen it, ironically enough. She just never seen that movie. So I love those types of movies that center not quite so much on the demonic side, but on the ghost side. Because I always saw ghosts as apparitions as part of our world, like that step between each side. And so tonight, what we're going to do is we're going to get into the history of ghosts in just a second here. But some of the other stuff that we have coming up tonight, I just want to make sure you guys all know, we're going to talk about the Bible and horror movie themes because they correlate. Trust me. We have a science segment about foot fetishes.
Or just fetishes in general.
Or foot fetishes.
Yes, or including.
And we're going to talk about Chris Hanna's favorite fetish, one that he's going to embarrass his wife live on our show tonight. And we get to send that and clip that to her and say, hey, here's your Christmas present from Chris Tanner.
Oh, yeah. That ought to be a good time.
And we'll also, I have a personal ghost story that we'll tell, and then you and I will probably go ahead and debunk some of that because I've looked into the science behind some of it, and we're not doing 2 science segments, but we are going to talk about why I no longer believe in the one real ghost story that I have.
All right, and then if we got some time, we'll probably touch base on, because you mentioned one of your favorite ghost stories or movies is 13 Ghosts. Well, a couple of things like that we like about scary stuff, horror, or ghost stories in general. I have a couple of things that aren't quite horror, like the standard horror, because my idea for scary things isn't the typical ghosts, ghouls, goblins, and gore, the big G's. It's more the psychological horror. I really like paranoia, schizophrenia, really freaky stuff when you really have no idea what's coming. So we'll talk about possibly some of our favorites there too if we have some time.
Yeah. But to begin with, we wanted to talk about the origins of ghost stories. I did a little bit of research, not a ton, don't want to make it a long segment, but I did a little bit of research because, again, like for me, I find the ghost story aspect very intriguing, something I genuinely enjoy. So, to begin with, we got to define ghosts, right? We define everything every fucking segment. So, let's define ghosts. Ghosts are generally described as solitary essence that haunt particular locations, objects, or people associated with life. Through stories of phantom armies, ghost trains, phantom ships, and even, you guessed it, ghost animals.
Pet Cemetery. Oh yeah, man.
Yes. one of the scariest movies I ever saw as a kid.
Yeah, that was weird.
Ghosts started as creatures that was just an extension of living after you passed away. So when I started to do my research, I said, holy shit, like I never saw ghosts as something that was just a normal thing, right? I never saw it as a way of just associating death after life. But originally ghosts weren't something to be feared. They weren't something that you would go, holy shit. Even in the early Abrahamic religions, people believed them as just a form of something that wandered, something like you or I. They believed that they weren't malice, but that they could influence a little bit. And Homer wrote about them as a vapor, glibbering and whining into the earth. Basically, they're just vapor, smoke, something generally that nobody feared. And I found that interesting because when we look at the history of horror movies and horror stories and ghost stories, people like to be scared. And we have to look at that. And ghosts are one of the earliest forms of how we can see it. And probably because we don't know what happens when we die. We never understand it. It's not something. It wasn't until the 5th century BC that they started to appear as harmful entities, something you could summon or use to attack or avenge somebody. So what do you think about that, Chris? That's crazy, right? I never heard that. I never thought of ghosts as something that could live beside us and we would never, experience it any different. I always thought them as harmful, evil entities, such as we talked about a second ago, 13 Ghosts. Those ghosts try to fucking kill you. Like, you don't wake up, You're dead. And I never saw them as just harmless entities that were just in the same realm that we were in.
Well, having read through a lot of Greek mythology and those kinds of things, it was a natural progression. You always hear about them going down to Hades and going through and seeing and talking to people that had lived before. And then there's Dante's Inferno, where you're actually talking with those past humans that had lived pre the salvation or the Savior coming to save them. So they're in limbo and weird stages of hell. Those kinds of things, like the ghosts weren't there to attack you. This seems that it was something that developed later on, and my guess is it's probably pretty closely tied with psychological disorders, the exorcism perspectives that these people, something weird is happening, and I guess the people would believe, hey, that there's a bad spirit in there. That's the devil. They've got some evil in them to get it out of them. They didn't understand that the brain could simply break. That's my guess, where like the malicious ghost came in, and some kind of connection to that fear of death or evil spirits coming in, because obviously that would be your origin of ghosts, right? It's the ultimate unknown that we need. So if life continues, then obviously there's an aura, there's a soul, there's a spirit that continues beyond. And so can we see that when they leave, or is it always perfectly invisible? That kind of stuff, since religion and our ideas of afterlife have evolved over time, I don't think it's weird that we kind of thought of this, especially in the beginning, and then we use it as a tool maybe through the exorcism and psychological disorders, like make it this evil thing. And then obviously it's picked up because that's scary stuff, man. Like the Exorcist movie, my wife was saying earlier today, that's one of the scariest movies ever. So that's basically what the Beyond life ghost thing for me was when I was younger.
Yeah, and it's funny because I never found The Exorcist that scary of a movie. I kind of thought it grotesque. I never really thought of it as a scary movie.
Yeah.
I the Poltergeist, on the other hand,
yeah,
holy shit.
Oh man,
Yeah,
I love those movies.
The Poltergeist, man, holy fuck, that comes out of the TV, the fucking closet. You didn't know where the fuck it was coming from, and it was all from a goddamn Native American fucking burial ground.
the old guy in the third one in the mirrors, that got me with like
Yes.
Candyman 2 got me in the mirrors in the bathroom, dude. That freaked me out.
Yeah. It was like Bloody Mary. So, like I used to read Goosebumps as a kid behind my parents' back. They did not approve of Goosebumps, just in case they're listening to this. They did not approve of this shit. But I tell you what, I used to read them. I used to borrow them from the library. I had a friend that had these things. I love Goosebumps. It was a favorite thing of mine. I also liked the Fear Street from R.L. Stine as well, the more middle-aged adult type thing. I love that too. But some of them they were very, very creepy, but they always dealt with ghosts. A lot of them liked to deal with ghosts, and that was a big thing. So when I was doing my research and all that, some of the ghost lore has a very colorful history, right? So I looked up something from deathreference.com. The word ghost has been in use since the late 16th century. It derives from an ancient term, Gast, in a language that has evolved into modern German. For some time, ghost has usually signified this disembodied spirit of a deceased person. Earlier meanings still cling to the word, however. Gast originally referred to a terrifying rage. A person who experienced shock or terror can be still described as aghast, frightened by an angry ghost. Fear of an angry ghost is built into the whole definition of that. And so for me when we look at that and we go, okay, where do we got to go from here? It makes sense that it evolved. That makes perfect sense. It evolved because that's how everything works in life. Evolution infiltrates all that we do. Evolution is like the basis by which we can call life as itself. And so, with the ghost stories, it just makes sense that they've progressed. And because people want to control, want to manipulate people, what's the easiest way you can control people with? Fear.
Language and fear. Yes, you change the way people talk. It's one of the things that's the most useful tool in the movie and the book, 1984 from Orwell. Changing the way you communicate. Language evolves. Language changes. You can see these changes throughout time and what happens with the Gaelic into the modern English. There's some really, really cool stuff that's happened through there. So, like, having the semantics for the word, the understanding of where the word was, where it is now, and where it could possibly go in the future is important. Those kinds of things. It's just knowing history is very important to know, especially for something like this.
Yeah. And it's funny, even today, my mom still actually believes in ghosts. Like, okay, so, and I'll tell a little story, and this is not the one that, I believe in. This is not my story. But when we moved up here to Michigan from Ohio, we bought a house, and there was this whole big thing about the police surrounding my house. And this is before I actually got into trouble. I was not in trouble at this current state. But what would happen was, all of a sudden, the police surrounded my house. And my dad comes out and's like, can we help you, officers? And he didn't know they were surrounding the house at the time. He came out, and the officer's like, yeah, is your son here? And he's like, yes, my son's here. It's, 10:30 at night. Why would he not be here? And the police officer's like, well, we have your house surrounded. We just want to make sure you know that, so don't freak out. Is your son's name this? And I won't repeat the kid's name. And my dad's like, no, that's not my son's name. My son's name's Christopher Tanner. And they're like, okay, well, can we see some ID, some birth certificates and stuff? So they went back and forth, and the whole time I'm sleeping. I never knew about this. And the whole time I'm sleeping, and they're going back and forth. Finally, the cops leave the house. Well, whoever lived there before us must have been a drug dealer and was in some serious shit, because they were surrounding the house looking for him.
Looking for the kid?
Yeah, for the kid that used to live there. Him and his mom used to live at this house. And it's a suburban neighborhood. I mean, I lived in a very quiet neighborhood. It was a very, very quiet neighborhood. There was not a lot of action. There was not a lot of people. A lot of old people lived in my area.
The burbs.
The burbs, almost. Yes, we were on the outskirts of the burbs. And they came, right? And they left. And then so my parents started to do a little research. Well, come to find out, the kid that lived before us there, he had a friend. And his friend had shot himself with a shotgun while he was cleaning it. So it was a complete freak accident. Well, during the investigation, I think they discovered that the kid was on drugs, and they started to do further investigations. Long story short, they believed that other kid was selling drugs. They wanted to investigate him farther to see if there was some malpractice in it. And so that day, after they told my parents that, my mom actually thought a ghost haunts the house. She thinks things move in the house without even actually moving. She was, I know that was there and it's not there anymore. Or I hear weird noises and this is that. And it's like, Mom, you live in a fucking 40, 50-year-old house. What do you expect? It's settling. It's old. You don't take care of it the best way you could. It's going to have weird sounds. But she still to this day thinks it's the ghost of the kid that shot himself.
Oh, man. I know my mother believes in the afterlife. She believes in stuff like that. I don't know if she believes ghosts per se, but she does believe, like family, ancestors, and everybody's still up and listening and keeping an eye on. But I whenever I hear people thinking like, oh, the house is haunted because this thing happened and this thing happened and this thing happened, it always comes back to humans are pattern-seeking creatures. This is what we do. And so it always comes back to that. That's what we find ways to link those kinds of things together because that's what we want, I guess.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting because ghosts, as they've evolved, they've created a whole history, right? They've created a way that they've intertwined with our religion, our politics, our emotional beings. They've infiltrated us. And, so I love the ghost season. I just love it. But I would be remiss if we didn't talk about the skeptics, because there's skeptics. There's lots of skeptics involved in this. It's not just the fact that everybody believes in ghosts. Even back in the early 150 AD, there was a individual called Lucian of Samosata from the 2nd century AD, and his tale is called The Doubter. And he relates how Demetrius, the learned man from Thrace, lived in a tomb outside of the city gates to prove that the cemeteries were not haunted by spirits. And Lucian relates how he persisted in his disbelief despite the practical jokes perpetrated by some of the young men in the area who dressed up in black robes with skull masks just to frighten him. The accounts of Lucian are written down in notes, something about the popular classic expectations of how a ghost would look. So even back then, people are doubting, people are skeptical, if you want to call it that, of ghosts.
Well, it's the same thing that's in the Bible. It says like a fool in his it's a fool in his heart who does not believe. Like that is essentially proof that there were doubters and people who did not believe at that time. Otherwise, why would you have to give them a name of a fool? The same kind of thing would happen with ghosts and stuff. There were probably always people that were like, no, this is fake. I've never seen it. I don't have any reason why I would believe that there's some kind of creature. And then when someone tries to trick you, usually at the first second of being scared or whatever, if someone jumps up on you, that you're going to be like, your initial fight or flight response, the adrenaline, your incredibly large adrenaline gland or adrenal gland in our bodies just fires everything off. But then once you get a moment to think about it, you're like, okay, yeah, that was pretty easily distinguishable as someone playing a trick on you. Those were obviously people dressed up in whatever. Rarely, I think, does something come through where it stays with you forever that you really genuinely believe. Like you said, you had a moment where you genuinely thought you had a ghost story. I've never had one.
Yeah. And we'll get to that later.
Yeah.
Good foreshadowing, Chris. As we walk out of this segment, as we leave this segment and go into the next segment, which is going to be a lot more fun and not quite ghost related. Make sure you guys stick tuned. When we come back, we will talk about foot fetishes, other fetishes, and what Chris Hanna does with his wife in the bedroom. We'll be right back, everybody. Chris Tanner here, one of the hosts of Cellar Door Skeptics. Thank you for enjoying our show, and remember, prepare for the revolution.
Hi, I'm Adam Collins, and I'm organizing the first ever Atheist of Facebook online convention.
First ever Atheist of Facebook online convention.
Atheist of Facebook online convention.
We're bringing this convention to you, to your home, for free.
Again, it's free.
We have a huge, diverse set of speakers from all over the world speaking about all kinds of different topics of interest in atheism.
Atheism in America and how we can work to achieve social normalization.
Childbearing, motivational stuff for getting them politically active, making them aware that they can affect change.
Talking to your family about religion.
Black atheists, the minority within the minority.
Sexism in the major world religions.
There's going to be a whole other kind of show coming y'all's way.
On November the 7th.
November 7th.
And we'll be seeing you November 7th on our YouTube page. All the details are on the Facebook pages. See you there.
Now, back to the show.
Welcome back to Cellar Door Skeptics. Thank you guys for sticking around with us from a break. As we move through this episode, we are going to talk about fetishes. And hopefully tonight, Chris Hanna won't talk over my head, because usually our science segments go over my head just at least a little bit. But tonight we're going to talk about fetishes. So Chris, tell us a little bit about the types of fetishes and what made you decide that this is the best science segment for this show.
Well, I didn't really decide so much as you said it. For a topic that we could do, and we were trying to figure out if this would be something that would be interesting then to run a full segment on. I did a little bit of research, and I found something on the Kinsey Institute where they were summarizing a Psychology Today editorial, and it was awesome. So I decided, yeah, we could definitely talk about it, because there's a bigger overarching word at play here called paraphilia, and then underneath it is fetish. It's a little bit more specific. But
well, if you think about it, if you think about what we're doing, right, what we do in sort of our show is we're talking about ghosts tonight and horror movies, and that's kind of a fetish. I mean, that has to be a fetish. That has to fit in that encompassed little section, because I have a fetish with ghosts. I love ghosts.
It could be a fetish. I mean,
people
do remember
fuck ghosts in that movie, right?
I do remember there was a story that Lucy Liu said that she had a ghost come down out of the sky and made love to her while she was sleeping on a couch one day. So I don't know why I still remember that.
Isn't
story,
that a Patrick Swayze movie too? I think that's a Patrick Swayze movie too.
Yeah, that could have been something along those lines. But I mean, this paraphilia thing was like this bigger thing, so it covers all kinds of stuff. And so what basically the editorial and what the Kinsey Institute said is, like, under that term paraphilia and fetish, but they said that there really is no such thing as a fetish. So what they did was they covered search terms for adult website users and specific preferences. So naturally, the understandings of normal human sexuality are always in flux. But what exactly is a fetish and how can it affect someone's sexual experiences is what the Kinsey Institute article started off with. But, I mean, we really need to get into the definition to start, because you've heard the term fetish and paraphilia, as I just mentioned. But sometimes people use the word fetish to imply any kind of atypical sex interest or kink. But for sex researchers, Fetish specifically refers to a strong sexual preoccupation with an object, material, or body part. So fetishism is not self-recognized as a psychiatric disorder, but some of the topics and things they're considered non-traditional, and they are sexual. So like these are some really weird words. I'm going to try to give it. We'll do a couple of these words and we'll just let it go. But Avalino. Oh man, Avalino. I can't even say it.
You can't even say it.
It's a fetish for.
Sounds
stomach.
like Alvin. Alvin and Chickmunks. Is that kind of what it is? Alvin.
Alvinolagnia, something along those lines. Yeah. And then there's Dorophilia, which is a fetish for animal furs, leathers, and skins. And then there's just an easy one to read, balloon fetishism. You get the idea. But
no, hold on. I want to know what balloon fetish is. Seriously, what's a balloon fetish?
I don't know. Well, you just said you had a ghost.
I thought you did the research.
You said you had a ghost fetish. I mean, we can just make an assumption here that a balloon fetish would be probably people who get some kind of sexual arousal. Like if I was sitting here twisting some balloon animals for you, like that sound of the balloons twisting and stuff, that might get you a little bit riled up. So, but let's go back to the paraphilia thing because I said that's a bigger general thing. It's Robert T. Francoeur. It's Complete Dictionary of Sexology. And paraphilia means compulsively responding in a sexual way to an unusual or socially unacceptable stimulus. Now, that's another thing. It's socially unacceptable. People always lump these fetishes and things in with negative things towards your sexuality. Psychiatrists might defer to the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. It's called DSM. I'll say that for short because it's just a big title. But that's the primary source for mental disorders. And so the most recent edition, it describes paraphilia as a psychiatric disorder, but also it used to have homosexuality in there as considered a psychological disorder or psychiatric disorder. So we've seen these things change and move because in 1973 is when they removed homosexuality. But it says, in fact, there's a time when paraphilia and fetishism, transvestism, and sadomasochism are removed from the DSM altogether. So mirroring a move made by psychiatrists in Sweden for fetish origins and things like that. So, I mean, we're seeing it change. So it's been removed from the idea that it's a negative connotation. That would be a good place to put it for you. Have you, because you had a much more conservative upbringing than I did, was anything besides, the missionary position, looking into each other's eyes, that the only way, or was anything different considered like bad or taboo in your world?
Everything was considered bad or taboo. How about this? We didn't have conversations about sex growing up. My sex education, and this may shock the listener, but my sex education literally was the fact that my mom says, "Hey, if you masturbate, you're going to go to hell. Oh, hey, please don't masturbate. It's not something God wanted." And obviously, what does that make me as an individual do? It makes me curious. I mean, and the best part is that while you guys had dial-up internet and you had to wait 3 minutes to see a naked picture, I had an ISDN line. I had a dedicated internet line. So you were dialing in at 14.4 kilobytes a second. I had 128.6 coming in. So while it took you 3 minutes to upload a titty pic, I got it in less than a minute. So I was able to look at porn like so much faster probably than anybody else just because we had a fast internet. And
your parents are always trying to figure out, why the hell are we going through all this tissue?
Oh, that's what socks are for, buddy.
Oh, yeah. And your mom's like, what is he walking around in? It's so crunchy all the
time. But no, we didn't have conversations about sex. So we didn't. I went to a private school, so we actually didn't even have a real sex education. We have this abstinence only, this focus on, hey, you should remain pure for God. Because they could say that shit because it was a private school. It wasn't even a public school. They didn't have to follow any sort of norms.
That's brutal. That's seriously brutal.
So for us, any type of sexual act, honestly, was to a point of perversion. And it was only because they didn't want us to know about it or they didn't want to talk about it. So, the funny thing was, though, my mom had this book, and I probably shouldn't say this, but my mom had this book that was like a woman's book, and it explained all the different sexual reproductions, but it also explained all sorts of different issues. It was probably 1,500 pages. Huge book. Very few pictures. It was not masturbation material by any means. But I'll tell you what, I learned more about female anatomy from that book than you can even imagine. It was my own little sexual education book. And my mom, I don't think my mom even knew that I found this book. She hid it in her dresser drawer, and I went one day, was just going through shit in my parents' dresser drawer, and I found this book, and I was like, holy shit, it's about sex. Holy shit, oh my God. And so I learned so many different things about the female anatomy and the male anatomy from that book that I didn't understand what the difference in taboo was. And for me, I didn't go from, watching normal porn. There was no such thing as, like normal porn. It was just porn on the internet. And, I've seen, as a kid even, I've seen everything from animal porn to shitting porn to piss porn to gangbangs to, orgies.
I remember I remember what we called it in high school when somebody would find someone would find like an old VHS. It was like, we called it 70s mullet porn. And there was like, it was just this hairy group party. And I mean, that stuff was always pretty wild. The porn thing that's the basis for this test on Psychology Today, which is actually pretty cool that you brought that topic in. Because what they did was they checked a billion searches on the internet. And that's how this data isn't going to be data that is from like an experiment inside a laboratory or anything. What they did was they used real world data, which is one of the reasons why I think this is a very, very good article, and it's a really really good case study. So it says that they found it didn't take much analysis, it says, to realize that both the scholarly and the popular catalogs, remember the DSM that I mentioned a little bit ago, they bore little resemblance to reality. The online behavioral data simply did not match clinical accounts. The academic literature did an awful job of predicting the distribution of sexual interest in a cross-cultural sample of hundreds of millions of people. The popular predictions by ordinary folks, including sexual activists, weren't any better. So the stunning divergence between the clinical conceptualizations of paraphilias and the empirical window into their actual presence in the population became too significant to ignore. So essentially what the psychologists and the resources had that they used for research and stuff, it's old, it's outdated, and it's not up to date, or it's not effective enough or thorough enough. For the Psychology Today article, you can read it and you can see there's an image that was put together for Deviant Desires author Catherine Gates, and it's this crazy line figure, I guess, that try to map out all of the different kinds of sexuality, and it's so complex that I couldn't even share it here because you have to zoom in so far. But basically what they said that they don't exist is because there are so many different kinds of searches that people are interested in that there's no like one thing that's just weird and this is really rare. That what they expected to be rare turned out to be fairly common in the populace. And so they're saying that the fetishes themselves, what they expected them to be as a negative connotation, simply doesn't exist, and that they said that the word fetish should go to the way of the dodo bird, so to speak. It says right here, it says that it should go the way of the terms like retarded, spastic, hysteria. It says that it's not a needed word anymore. It says these terms embody both a derogatory and misguided understanding of the nature of human sexual preference. Men and women do not suffer from atypical or deviant fetishes, but rather possess a range of typical sexual interests that can mostly be predicted from the natural operation of healthy sexual mechanisms in the brain. Case in point, it just any type of thing, because Chris said that I'm gonna be making some wild admonition of fetishes that it's not going to be this crazy thing, but my interest, I would say I'm probably exhibitionist. I think it's fun and cool, like sexuality and doing things outside in public and stuff. That's not that rare or that strange or anything like that, but I always associate it with having like a healthy self-image and like thinking, I look great. I mean, I don't look amazing, but I have a healthy body, and I've always thought that it's fun to do stuff like that in public. And David Teachout, who was one of our guests last week, he said that you actually don't have a healthy body image. A lot of times people could be voyeurs, and the fact that they have a negative body image can actually be one of the reasons why they like to do that, to help give them a boost or to make it like a taboo and stuff. So that would be my big revelation that you alluded to earlier. So I mean, do you got anything? I mean, are you going to throw anything out there? Come on.
I don't have any weird sexual fetish, I guess. I mean, for me, it's not. I mean, sex is what it is. I don't have some big revelation. I mean, when I was a kid, I found any sort of sexual act fascinating. Personally.
Yeah.
So, I'm probably more desensitized than a lot of other people because I've seen a lot of weird porn. And for me, the biggest fetish is overcoming the fact that porn is not an actual revelation of what sex is. It's an illusionary thing. And for me, the biggest fetish is saying, hey, how do I break away from, looking at something that's illogical? It's just an illogical, it's a pre-set up movie. It's like we watch a movie, how does it end? Well, it's going to end the way the author wants it to, but that's not how life is. That's not how it works. It's not in any way, shape, or form a reality.
The way they always end porn, it's just the facial. That is the most. That's just, it's like, we get it. Okay, I get it. But okay, and then not always. They don't always end it, but it's like that's one of the things that women don't like about a lot of porn is that they see that as like a degrading thing, and in most cases, they're probably correct in that assumption. Because that is obviously a domination or a dominant type male act at the end of this entire thing. So it's just having that healthy understanding for it's okay, everything's cool. We can all kind of have an idea, a conversation about this. Going back to the articles that we were talking about, the most scientists believe that sexuality and fetishes and things like that began early in life. And so you were talking about with the porn and seeing stuff online. So like in that beginning, when you were first experimenting or seeing those types of things, that changes the way that your brain starts to create your preferences and stuff. Not sexual preference, but what you like as far as what turns you on, sexual pleasure. And those kinds of things would lead to sexual pleasure with a particular object, material, or body part. Then the research that focused on men mostly for this type of test, or in actual experiments, and the reason being, the reason they believe is it's really easy to see male arousal. That's when one of the doctors says it's very easy to see it. I understand that, and nowadays when they have the ability to do a lot of EKG, brain, and CAT or MRI, they've actually had people going into these things and having orgasms inside an MRI machine to see what's going on in the brain, which is really cool. And nowadays we have a little bit better way of testing, but back in the day it was just easier to see male arousal. And so there's nothing wrong with fetishes, the way that the entire thing concludes. However, some people might feel inconvenience when they can't experience arousal without their fetish object. And that's something that I'm kind of scared of, is like getting in too much into like a certain kind of porn or whatever, and not really finding your wife or your loved one and whoever your partner is. It's working on that arousal, keeping everything fresh and stuff. So those are things that are real. That also might happen in an individual's fetish incompatible with their partner's sexual preferences. So like when someone likes something a lot, like let's say I like exhibitionism, my wife does not like that kind of stuff. Not saying yes or no to either of those, but let's say that was a case. It would be very difficult for me to have the kind of satisfaction that I would want being an exhibitionist if the person you're with is not. So those kinds of things you need to work on. And then finally, many people find that their specific fetishes make them feel uncomfortable, unethical, or upset. And a non-judgmental, sex-positive therapist would be able to talk with these people. So if you see any kind of thing that you, I guess, could be detrimental to you or your loved ones, or if you're having impulses that could be bad, especially with children, obviously, talk to a therapist. It's not good to tuck that stuff in and just hold it inside. And so in the end, with all fantasies, discussing fetishes and partner may make some people nervous, but it's normal, man. It's just a normal thing that we all need to do, and just to accept who we are and how people operate. So, anything else you wanted to tie into this, or we can work our way out of this segment, Tris?
We're gonna walk our way out of this segment, like we always do. and you know, this Psychology Today articles are really great, and they talked about how it's changing it. And for me, I guess the takeaway from this is that, yeah, you're right. Fetishes are not abnormal. It could be based on how we grew up. It could be based on what we're influenced by. And it's only abnormal when it goes to the extreme. Just kind of like almost anything. Atheism is weird at an extreme level. If I spent my whole day talking about atheism, probably people would think that's an extreme measure. Same with if you're a Christian on the opposite side. If you don't have other draws, other abilities, other ways that you cope with life, then at some point you're going to say that extremism is weird. So for me, fetishism isn't weird as long as it doesn't harm another individual. And so, in the psychology today, when we look at how the evolution of that word you said that I'm not going to even try and repeat. Yeah. If you look at how evolution works, it's because we've gained a greater understanding of sexuality. We've gained a greater understanding of humans. We've understood different types of resources. And what that does is that brings us through this post-Freudian sexual liberation that we've had. And it takes us into a new generation, a new, I don't know, revolution, if you want to call it that.
Sounds good to me.
So as we leave, Psychology Today, one of their closing statements is, we are human, and it seems congenital lovers, natural, sensational seekers, limitless sources of eros, essentially sexual beings. Sexuality is part of our fate. What we do with it decides our destiny. The uncanny power of sex to motivate and drive us to seek sexual satisfaction must not be underestimated in our post-Freudian sexual liberation. This sexual power can be both creative and procreative, or it can be destructive to yourself and to others. It is by definition irrational, irrepressible, and unrelenting. As a key component of our demonic sex and eros demand expression. What we do or what we don't do with our sexual energy, air quotes, determines who and what we will become, what kind of created relationships we will have, and how we express ourselves to the world. And of course, it will represent collectively what we are as a species and how we will survive. Thank you guys. Make sure you stick around. We will be right back with more Cellar Door Skeptics. Thank you guys. Stick around after this quick commercial break.
Hey, what's up? I'm Steve Hayes.
And I'm Dave Curry.
And we're from Prophetcast.
And you're listening to Cellar Door Skeptics.
On the Fox News Network.
They're not affiliated with Fox.
Everyone's a Fox affiliate.
If you guys like what you're hearing on Cellar Door Skeptics, please consider sponsoring us on our Patreon page. Our goal at Cellar Door Skeptics is to help promote more science, skepticism, secularism, and humanism in the world. We want to create better content for our podcast and for you, the listener, all while trying to help promote local activism. We're going to strive to make better podcasts, and I'll tell you what, we're even going to contribute some of the proceeds to charity. So please join us over at Patreon.com/Cellar Door Skeptics to make sure that you sponsor us for as little as $1 an episode. Thank you guys so much, and prepare for the revolution.
And welcome back to Cellar Door Skeptics. I am Chris Hanna, also with my co-host here, Chris Tanner. We are going to be talking about the horror. We're going to be turning actual biblical stories into horror stories.
Well, I don't think we actually have to turn them into it, though.
No, we don't really have to turn them into too much. They're pretty self-explanatory. They're pretty self-writing. I, having never really been a believer, I had to do some research on this one because I don't know much about the Bible. The one that you picked, dude, is insane. I had no idea that thing was in there. I don't think a lot of people really know that's in there either.
No, I'm sure they don't. I'm sure it's not something that gets brought up in Sunday school.
Well, yeah, I mean, cannibalism. That's gonna be a Sunday you're gonna remember, right? That's a Sunday to remember. That would make Mandy Moore cry a little bit. So yes, I'm throwing in some really crappy 2000s movies here. Well, let's start with that one, man. Because you just tell me where the hell you found it, and I mean, really, what's it about?
All right, so. For me, what was the inspiration ironically, it was a BuzzFeed. It's something that showed up in my Facebook feed. I clicked on it because usually I kind of go, I bet these are going to be fucking stupid.
BuzzFeed was right for once?
Yeah, this one was definitely right. And it wasn't that they were right. It's just what they did is it said most people know love is patient and love is kind, and the Lord is my shepherd and I shall not want. But here are some of the less celebrated verses from the Bible. And the name of the whole article is called 7 Shocking Bible Verses You Probably Won't Hear in Church. And I said, well, shit, I got to read that. And then the tagline for it says, God commissioned bears to attack, the praise of infanticide, and cannibalism? And I was like, cannibalism? All right, hold on. I think I missed this one in my Sunday school class, so I better go look at that one. So number 3 on their chain.
Yeah, we're not going to go through all 7.
No, we won't go through all 7. The big one is number 3. That's the one that hit me the most. It says, basically, you were disobedient, so God will make you eat your children. And the verse that they quote, the little meme, is called Jeremiah 19:9. And it says, and I will make them eat the flesh of their sons and the flesh of their daughters, and all shall eat the flesh of their neighbors in the siege and in the distress with which their enemies and those who seek their life will afflict them.
And that's your God voice. That's
my God voice.
That's what we've got right there. That is the king of all the universe is dictating how he's going to make. And this is something that my first question was, who is he telling this to? So we did a little research on that. Apparently, these are the followers of Baal, which is one of the I guess tribes that were battling for supremacy in tribal Judea. And so these are the Baal followers, and they burn their children at altars, I guess, for sacrifices to Baal. And so this is God saying that he's going to destroy them and torture them and kill them. So my first thought was, he's not instructing the Jews specifically that he'll make them eat their children. But Chris, you just said, yeah, I know, but this is still horrible.
Yeah, and so there's a couple of different aspects. There's 2 different ways you can look at that. And you're right, the cannibalism reference is not that the Jews are going to, eat other people. That's not what God was specifically doing. God was going after, basically saying, hey, if you disobey me, if you do these different things, this will happen.
Yeah, and believe in a different God.
Yeah, and so it kind of comes from the story of the potter and the clay, and it kind of moves forward with that. And so, the story of the potter and the clay is basically talking about how God's got to mold you. He's going to mold you. You're going to do his works through the molding of him. But it kind of goes on to explain that if you disobey him, there's going to be consequences. It's a fear theme is basically what it is. I mean, and one of the verses says, the word that came to Jeremiah from the Lord. And again, most of this is God talking to Jeremiah relating it to the people. And it says, arise and go down to the potter's house, and there I will let you hear my words. So I went down to the potter's house, and there he was, working on the wheel, and the vessel he was making of clay was spoiled in the potter's hands, and he reworked it into another vessel, as it seemed good to the potter. And so the whole point of that, the potter story, is basically we're clay, right? We're clay in the hands of God. God gets to mold us. He gets to use other circumstances and different things to make us who we are. But they never ever went into chapter 19 in Bible study. We never got chapter 19 where it says, if you don't do this and God tries to mold you, he's going to do other horrible things to you, such as make you watch other nations eat their children. And if you disobey me, this will happen to you too. It's like a complete reflection to, I think, another verse in Deuteronomy that talks about the exact same thing.
Well, we've got a couple of other things that we're going to talk into the Bible as well. We didn't want to dwell too much on the potter, the clay, and cannibalism, because I don't know too much about the Bible per se. I never really dug into it too deep, and so this entire atheism thing for me has been kind of a crash course in our holy writ, so to speak. The one that really stuck with me, I'm a fan of Sublime, the band Sublime, and they have a song that covers the Psalm 137. It starts off with, by the rivers of Babylon, and there we sat down and there we wept. Obviously, Sublime doesn't go to the end of the psalm, because it doesn't end so happily. They're talking with mirth about Zion and how they were pushed away from it, and they can't sing the songs of Zion. Their tormentors asked, because they're not in the Lord's land or whatever. But they don't say that. They end it is happy is it says, happy shall he be that taketh and dashes thy little ones against the stones. Basically just smashing the children of your enemies on rocks. That is the warm and fuzzy ending to what is one of the more popular psalms of all time. But it surprises me that people don't usually catch on to that. But that to me, that's that one line. That's enough horror that I can create in my own mind to genuinely see it's just utter horror and surprise for something along those lines. But going a little bit bigger into that, I don't know, like I said, much about the Bible specifically. And so I look at the entire book of Revelation as this monstrous horror movie. I don't know. Is that where you are too, Chris? Because I'm assuming you've read it.
Yes. Yes, I don't see the whole thing as a horror movie, but I do see very unhumanistic tendencies that run through the thing. And so the Sublime song, I'll be honest, I didn't know about the Sublime song. When you put this in the notes, I'd never heard this before. And maybe it's because I'm not really a big Sublime fan. But the Bible verse, I have heard that. I actually have a t-shirt. I have a t-shirt that says, I'm an atheist because I read it. And on the back, it has that exact same Bible verse on it from Psalms. And it says that. And I've actually gotten questions. I had this kid at Myers literally follow me out to the parking lot to explain to me that the reason that Bible verse had to happen was because it was expressing the issues that the Jews had because they were put in exile from Babylonia. And it was this big thing of what will happen because you went against God, because you went against God's people. And I kept trying to explain to him, well, that sounds horrible. It makes the Jews basically say, hey, we're elitists. You know, they're basically what you would call a white cis male back in the Bible. That's what God was trying to make them to be. You know, hey, we're better than everybody else. Except for they didn't have as much on their side as we do now. But that was, you know, when I heard that, his explanation for that verse, I just kind of said, you do still know this verse in the Bible, that God, even if it's not God's chosen people, he's still having babies' heads dashed on rocks. Their fucking brains. Can you imagine that? And I asked the guy, I said, why don't you sit here? Let's draw a picture for you. Imagine a baby younger than my children and their brains on the ground. Now you tell me how the fuck you can worship a loving God like that.
Oh yeah, and the reason that the baby gets smashed is because the parents don't believe in the same thing. They don't agree. It's not the baby's fault. It's not the baby's fault. It's one of the things that you hear Richard Dawkins talk about in The God Delusion is a baby is not a Christian baby. It's not a Jewish baby. It's not a Hindu baby. It's not an atheist baby. It's a baby. And it forms its own position, its perspectives, its personality, its own persona over time. And then it can take up, because you wouldn't say like, oh, that's a Democrat baby. That's a Republican baby. That's a conservative baby. That's absurd. Those types of things are ridiculous. And so the same kind of thing. This is not just babies being murdered. This is because your parents didn't believe in the same thing. So the sins of the father expressed onto the child. It's too much. It's too much. And then obviously the book of Revelation, when I was going with that, what I've always seen is just the synopsis of it. So there's the what is it? It's fire, rain, burning mountains, seas turned to blood, angels with swords flying from their mouths, as well as co-starring the ever-popular Four Horsemen, the Whore of Babylon, and, of course, the Beast.
Yeah.
Those three sound pretty cool. I mean, those are like...
They were. You want to know what my favorite time at church was? Every summer, we talked about Revelations. Dead serious. It was literally my favorite fucking part of the Bible. I'm that serious. And so, you know, the best part about that, if you think about my obsession with horror movies now and how I like all these different things, it probably stems from the fact that when we went through Revelations, I fucking read my Bible every fucking day. I mean, I went to church prepared. I was like, hey, well, let me jot all these notes down. I have 100 million questions. And the best part was the church we went to, it was a smaller church. But at night, our church population was half or less every time. People just didn't go to church. Even back in the early 90s, people didn't want to go to church at night. And I would go there. My parents always went there. My dad was a deacon. And we would go there, and I would sit there, and I'd be like, oh, it's Revelations time. This is my fucking favorite part right here. We got Revelation. Oh, somebody's going to get killed, or there's going to be a three-headed beast. This just sounds like the most amazing thing ever.
Yeah, we did talk about fetishes a little while ago and how the things you're interested in when you're younger help form your interest. Well, I mean, you could say that the Bible helped form your interest in murder movies, destruction, violence, and stuff like that. Because, hey, it's in there. It is right there in the pages. That's one of the fun things that they always talk about is that they don't talk about the violence and the murder and destruction in the Bible. It's the cherry picking stuff. And
my church did.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, that's another thing is that some hellfire damnation churches, obviously, they run with that. And that's a major thing because that's one of the things I was talking about for what Revelations is. When I was flipping through some stuff, it says the book of Revelation was written at a time when the significance of Jesus' legacy was furiously contested. And one reason why it gets hauled out so readily at times is similar discord. Presented as a divinely bestowed vision of all of the stuff that I mentioned. Essentially, it's a giant over-the-top cry of "you're doing it wrong." It says John of Patmos felt that his religion was being threatened by purported faithful who had assimilated into the dominant culture of the Roman Empire at the time. They said eating meat from a pagan temple sacrifice was a big issue for him. And so he wanted to remind them of the hideous fate awaiting that evil empire and anyone who had gotten too cozy with it. So it's just like this giant fear tag at the end of it. Just in case all of the good stuff in the Bible didn't keep you, there's this horrifying ending that you would meet if you didn't adhere would keep you there. Just the standard fear. I mean, that's huge.
Yeah. Which is ironic because you're foreshadowing to next week's episode.
Well, also for me, this isn't usually seen as a horror thing, but this is another one that I put down on the list. It's just the Passion of the Christ. This long, drawn out torture scene. It's like torture porn, straight up. And I didn't know what the flagellum was at the time, and so we did some research, and then obviously people who saw the Passion of the Christ, the Mel Gibson horrifying just blood gore movie. Well, the flagellum was like, it's basically a whip with in the movie they got it wrong. They were like hooks, but in reality they were like rough balls and like jagged
glass
things.
Or something on the end of them.
Yeah, and so it's like just like a coarse kind of thing. Like I would say like probably closer to like barbed wire or something, because the ones in the movies, they were just like you would completely peel a human. The way the hooks were done, you would just completely skin somebody. So it says rounded barbells about 1.5 inches long and 1 inch wide would bludgeon the skin and rip out wounds, and just overwhelmingly excruciating. And this was standard Jewish sentence was 39 lashes, because the Old Testament states 40 lashes is sufficient to kill a man. So they went one stroke less than killing someone. And then, I mean, then he was forced to carry a giant cross 2,000 feet up a hill. I can't think of a more just isolated, maybe the Job case when Job is tortured and given boils and everything in his life is just yanked away. That's probably a close second to the Passion of the Christ. The
Passion of the Christ has a character you can love. That's the difference. You know, in Job, they don't give you enough backstory. They don't give you enough ability to go, hey, fall in love with the character. The Passion of the Christ is almost like it gives you the backstory. It makes you want to like Jesus. You're like, I really like this guy. He's kind of nice. You know, he's not, well, outside of him cursing a fig tree, he's not a complete dick. He hangs out with hookers. He throws the money changers tables over. You know, he wanders to the... He's socialist almost. Yeah, don't say that in too many Christian circles. But yeah, Jesus almost makes you want to like him for the most part. And then all of a sudden, hey, by the way, you're going to get crucified in the most horrific way in the world. And when I was growing up, we talked about the crucifixion as a horrible thing. We did have that conversation, but it wasn't to the extent of the Passion of the Christ. And I remember when that movie came out, my buddy Johnny and I went to see that in the movie theater. And we got a couple bottles of wine, and we took our. We did. We drank
and saw the Christ die. That's a nice way to.
We did. We got a bottle of Merlot and a bottle of Pinot Noir, and I couldn't tell you the brand, but we got them and we popped the corks before we went in and shoved them in there, and we were drinking bottles of wine in there. And halfway through, I was just laughing because I didn't believe this shit. You know, I wasn't even an atheist at the time, and I still didn't believe the shit. I was like, Seriously, there's people sitting here crying because this person's being murdered and he's innocent. Well, I would cry too, except for the fact that it's illogical. It's like an overproduction. It's like all the worst things that could happen to somebody happen to this person. And it's like this person had the worst streak of good luck that you could, or bad luck that you could even imagine. And I was like, this is almost so over the top. It's a fucking illogical. It's just illogical. I just couldn't help myself. You just had to laugh at some point because I couldn't believe it. And there's a comedian, and I don't remember the comedian's name, but there's a comedian that says something about why would anybody wear the symbol of their tortured savior? So it'd be like if your loved one got got shut up in a school shooting and you decided to carry an AK-47 necklace. Who the fuck would do that? Who wants to carry this? Who wants to carry this torture device? And that's basically what it is. And people are wearing torture devices around their neck to represent their love for Christ and their passion for the Bible, I guess.
It's a repurposing of a symbol. I never really understood that too much either. It's like if Mrs. Kennedy walked around having, when after Robert Kennedy had died, and she would wear like a sniper rifle pendant or something along those lines. It just seems a little macabre, a little black as far as the humor is concerned. That'd just be a little bit too much. But we've covered some of this pretty crazy stuff here. For what's in the Bible, some of the stories that obviously the cannibalism one, even though they're not telling the Jews to eat babies and cousins and uncles and stuff, that's still pretty heavy stuff that I don't think. If anyone sees anything in here that something that they wanted us to mention or something along those lines, or comment or something, put something on our Facebook. You can put it on our Twitter. You can Cellar Door Skeptics. Just do a search for it. You can find us anywhere. Tell us some other stories, some crazy things that are in the book that maybe we don't even know about yet, because like I said, the cannibalism thing is new to me. I know the Ezekiel cooking food with shit. That one's pretty weird, but I wouldn't really call it a horror story. Maybe that could be a fecophilia fetish with with a little bit of the interest in dung on that end. But yes, we'll leave the fetish section there for everything else, and we'll continue on with the horror stuff here. So, do we have anything else for this segment, or are we going to work our way out of here now?
We're going to work our way out of here, and as we wrap up this segment, there's a great ending paragraph, and something I just randomly Googled when I was looking for horror movies in the Bible, and it's from gotquestions.org, and it says, in deciding which movies we should watch as Christians, and again, I'm not a Christian, but I thought this is pretty fitting, because we just talked about how many times in the Bible they basically have horror movies, and yet there is Christians that want to admonish those other Christians who want to watch horror movies, even though you would think the fetish would fit. But they said, in deciding what movies to watch, perhaps it would be wise to heed the words of the Apostle Paul in his second letter to the Corinthians. Do you not realize that Christ is in you? As Christians, we of course know that the Spirit of Christ resides in our hearts. He is with us wherever we go. What if, however, rather than occupying a place in our heart, Jesus Christ just walks beside us, so that we could literally see him every moment of the day? What effect would that have on our behavior? What if, when we went into these movies, for example, we saw Jesus Christ sitting next to us, watching the movie that we took him to, knowing the divine character of our holy and sinless Savior, and knowing the sanctity he places on the very life he died to give us? What sort of movie would we feel comfortable taking him to? So I'll leave you with that. Make sure every time you watch something, you look next to you and see, is Jesus crying? Is he laughing? Or would he say, please turn this shit off? Make sure you stay tuned, because after this quick commercial break, we'll be right back with more Cellar Door Skeptics.
This is Daniel from the Country Fried Free Thought podcast. I hope you enjoy Cellar Door Skeptics as much as I do, as they help us prepare for the revolution.
Have a burning question? Want to share your thoughts with us? Think you know something that we would find interesting? Well, you're in luck. Send us an email at cellardoorskeptics@gmail.com. All your thoughts, interests, and help, just to drop us a line. Send us an email, cellardoorskeptics@gmail.com, for anything that you want to tell us or ask us, and we'll promptly respond. Now, please enjoy the rest of the show.
As I lay in my bed, unable to move, staring at the dark image in front of me, I realized that maybe I had made a mistake. I had done something I swore I would never do before. I had spent the night with a friend of mine. We had used the Ouija board to summon a demon. a demon he called Malik. Something that I had no understanding of, didn't believe was real, but thought, hey, this sounds fun, let's try it. I laid there. I couldn't move, my arms stiff, lying beside me. And as I sat there, I thought, please, God, if you are real, please wake me up. Please let this be a dream. And then I was able to move. I ran upstairs looking for my friend, not understanding what's going on. In the living room, I saw glasses of milk, half full, all over the counter and the table. Not knowing what was going on, I continued to look for my friend. I went into his room to see if maybe he was in there. I threw the door open, and it was dead silent. I ran back outside looking for him. All over, I spent the next half hour trying to decipher where my friend had been. Finally, I went back into the house, and I heard a noise coming from my friend's room. Dare it be Malik, the demon that we tried to summon earlier? Is it really him? Could this really be happening? I walked into the room, and in the closet, that's where the noise came from. I threw the closet door open, and there my friend sat in his boxers with knives and forks surrounding him. And I asked, "What are you doing?" And he looked at me and he said, "Protecting myself from the demon." Welcome back to Cellar Door Skeptics. That's a little story, something that was told to me from a friend of mine who will remain nameless, of an encounter he claims he had with the demon he summoned. And so, as we close the segment out, I wanted to do something even lighter than we've already done, something less than history, something to talk about kind of what our loves of horror come from, what we like, what we want, what we desire, and what I do every October. So with me is Chris Hanna, as always, and I told him, I promised him that we would keep this short because we don't want to spend too long having this conversation. But I thought it would be good to express the different types of horror genres that we have, because he has a different take on horror than I do. I'm not going to say I don't like the slasher, because I do like the slasher films, but I also like ghost films. Ghost films just enthrall me to no extent, probably because it's something that seems more conceivable to me than some crazy killer who happens to get a chainsaw to run around and kill everybody in the middle of nowhere. But he has a completely different take on horror movies. So I thought, Chris, tell us a little bit about what your favorite part of Halloween is and what your favorite scary story would be.
For me, like, Halloween is it's just a great time. It's something when a lot of that weirdness, you can let your freak flag fly as far as costumes and stuff. There should be more days where we're allowed to wear costumes in public, so I don't get that weird stare from an old lady for wearing, like, I don't know, some crazy outfit to Meijer on a Sunday or something. But I'm a huge fan of psychological horror, and even in that, it's something that even isn't considered horror. Just psychological books that are just crazy. Well, one of the first ones that really made an impact for me was there's a story called The Yellow Wallpaper, and it's something that we had to read in school. It caught me by surprise. It's written by Charlotte Perkins Gilman, and this thing was just, okay, here's some reading that this, most of the time reading in history class or literature class, wherever this was read. I don't remember the exact moment, but it's a story about this woman and her husband, and they're taken to a beautiful secluded estate. And because he says that he's a doctor, he says that she's suffering from a temporary nervous depression, and they're trying to just go someplace quiet to rest and let her heal. The typical way they used to deal with psychological episodes in the past, it's just kind of lock you in a room and just let you rest it out. Which one of the things that I don't like about some of the horror movies like Bram Stoker's Dracula and Frankenstein, people would see something that scared them, and then it would just go be bedridden for 2 weeks. It's just absurd to me. But this particular story goes through what happens when this doctor locks his wife in his room, in this upstairs room that she didn't really like to begin with. And so she's having episodes. She's having nervous depression episodes. She's having psychological issues. And so he locks her in this room, and she's not allowed to write. She's not allowed to do anything. I don't even know how long she was in there. I can't remember specifically, but obviously long periods of time. But there's this ugly, nasty yellow wallpaper in the room, and it's got all kinds of designs and phrase, and it's just ugly and nasty. Well, over time, she starts seeing it moving. There's something happening. She's seeing crazy patterns in and she's locked in this room alone with a brain that needs assistance and help. And eventually she sees a woman locked and hidden and caught inside the wallpaper, and she has to free her. She has to free this woman from the wallpaper. And so her brain is breaking, it's shattering. Eventually, to free the woman, she has to peel the wallpaper from the wall by hand. And that's when her husband finally comes in to see what's going on, and he sees it. She's gone. She's lost her mind. She's tearing the wallpaper out by hand, crawling around the room, and that is horrifying to me. To think of was like what they used to do to people who are having psychological episodes and things like that is terrifying. To like imagine your brain breaking. I'm scared of two things biologically: is paralysis and losing my mind, obviously. But like the gore, horror, slasher stuff, it's great. I love it. I watched Rob Zombie's Halloween last night. But the psychological stuff is what really, really gets me about Halloween.
Yeah, and it's funny. When I was in high school, I wrote this story about this guy. And I should dig this story up because maybe it'd be interesting. Maybe it'd be stupid because, I was in high school when I wrote it. But I wrote a story about this guy that basically the same thing happened. He went insane. He was with his wife, and all of a sudden he took this medicine, which basically was acid, but I didn't want to call it acid because I was in school, and I don't think, if I remember right, the way I wrote the story is the guy didn't know what it was, but all of a sudden he started to go crazy, and he started sitting in a rocking chair in the attic, and next thing you know,
rocking chairs are inherently terrifying.
They are.
Why?
Yes, they are. In the sound, it's just that sound. Yes, the creak, and it's constant. It's always even. The way the chair works is just an even, and you're like, what the fuck? That's creepy. But this guy basically was sitting in his chair, and his wife comes upstairs, and then he has this basically crazy panic, and he basically shoots his wife, shoots a bunch of cops, and basically the TV talks to him, and he like wipes, the blood all over the place, and he just goes completely insane because of this drug. But it relates to the story. It's kind of the same thing. Even if he hadn't been on it, let's say he had been a little bit disturbed, or he had some sort of a mental issue where the chemicals became unbalanced. It's sad that we don't work as a society to better take care of people like that, because when you do put them in that, you don't have the ability to differentiate between reality and non-reality. You just don't. And it's really sad that's got to be scary as fuck. Yeah. People that have dementia, that's got to be scary as fuck. If you're like half understanding of what's going on and half not, that has to be the worst thing in the whole wide world.
That's basically what I was alluding to, is like kind of being there and kind of not being there. It's terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying to me. Is that kind of loss of autonomy, that loss of self, and so that's, I guess, that would be why paralysis and mental issues are probably the scariest things for me. Did you have a favorite short story or movies? What were you going to bring here for your first one?
For me, it was Hellraiser.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't know why, but for me, it was always that allusion to that box, right? It was like it was like the Indiana Jones of horror movies, like everybody wanted this fucking box. It was like this big secret. And I love big secrets. Like, I love the mystery, the aspects of going and doing the research and then finally finding it and going on an adventure. Like, if I were so afraid of snakes and spiders and shit like that, I would probably be an archaeologist, because that sounds fun. But it's that box and the way the box interacts with each other. And I'd never seen horror. Again, remember, I grew up very conservative, very, very, very conservative. And so for me, it was never something that when I found horror movies, it was like, holy shit, this exists. And, Jason was great. Everybody likes the nudity aspect. Everybody likes somebody getting their head chopped off or a chainsaw going through an arm. But for me, the Hellraiser side of it was more real, because it actually was that inner portal dimension. It transported you from reality to hell. And it was all about bondage. That whole movie is like this big bondage movie about, hey, let's put hooks in your back and hang you up, and we're not going to kill you, but we're going to torture you. And for me, the Hellraiser was scary in the aspect that if you could transport yourself and you did get to go to hell, this is what it would be like. And I remember I think I was 13 years old when I saw Hellraiser, and I thought, holy shit, if this really can happen, if this is really what hell is like, this is a lot worse than anything the Bible describes. This is like the Bible 17.0, for fuck's sake. Like, all of a sudden you're like, holy shit, you know. And then I watched Hellraiser 2, and it gets even more weird, you know, because they lure people into there, and then they devour them, and they're like, this is how they get their power.
Yeah, they is the Cenobites.
The Cenobites.
The Pinhead was the leader. Those guys were terrifying. They were awesome. Like, the one guy had like his mouth all like pulled open and his teeth were chattering. It's like those were great horror characters. Those are some of my favorites. There's like 12 of those Hellraiser movies, and they really went downhill as soon as the budget went down. Like, some of them were really bad. Like the last one, I think Hellraiser 1 through 3, and then Hellraiser Bloodline. I think those are the 4 that I really enjoyed. And after that, those went downhill pretty hard. But yeah, dude, those were a nice touch between psychological and the gore as well. So I mean, I really enjoyed that one.
And the other one was the Nightmare on Elm Street videos from when I was a kid, because to begin with, it was all about, if you fall asleep, this happens. That's fucked up. Yeah. That means you don't even get any rest. There's no rest. It's you go to sleep, you get tortured. You wake up, you're tired, and you're tortured. It doesn't matter what happens, you're tortured. And it kind of brings to light the whole thing, that whole urban myth about, if you are asleep and you get killed in your sleep, you don't wake up, you're just dead, and that you can actually die because of that. And I don't think there's any science behind it, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm almost positive there's no science behind that aspect. But that's a terrifying idea.
Yeah.
And I could tell you, I've had dreams, you know, in which that I've been murdered or killed, that I actually thought I was going to die. And there was one time where I was, you know, in a parking lot, right? And I'm pushing this cart, and I've got all my friends with me, and I don't remember who they were at the time, and I won't name names, but...
You died in a jackass skit?
No, I didn't die in a jackass skit. Jesus Christ. No, but I'm walking, and all of a sudden, you know, somebody behind me says, hey, your time is up. And as I turn around, I can hear the gunfire, and I can actually physically feel what I'm assuming will feel like what a bullet feels. Now, it's probably not, but it was outrageously intensely painful. And I could feel it in my left chest, and my right chest, and it just felt like a fire. And I could feel, and I'm watching myself bleed, and I'm sitting here going, oh, fuck, somebody just shot me. Shit. And then I collapse on my knees, fall over on my face, and I could see the blood pooling, and it's running. And then all of a sudden, I can literally feel reality slipping away, like kind of like when you're falling asleep and you're just so tired and you're trying to stay awake, but everything just kind of falls asleep. That's what it felt like. But I was dreaming, and then I woke up, and I was on my damn floor with a fucking nosebleed. Like, there's actual blood in front of my face. I was like, holy shit, I'm bleeding. I thought I was dead at first, and somehow it'd come back to life magically in another area. But it was just a nosebleed.
You probably had a Lego under your shoulder on your chest or something. That's why it felt like a gunshot. But that's why I was going to ask you is usually when you feel like when you're dreaming about something wet or whatever, like you're actually experiencing water or a liquid in your bed. And so I was gonna say, did you pee the bed? But no, you said you had a bloody nose.
No, so. I did not pee the bed. Not that time.
Well, I mean, those are both great horror movies. I like both of those a lot. Definitely Nightmare on Elm Street. I like the remake too. When they redid it, it wasn't bad.
Too child molesty for me.
Yeah, that one did get. Well, I mean, that was the whole thing. Freddie was a child molester. But.
I disagree with that, but.
Okay, well, that's some of the lore. We won't go into the historical accuracy of horror and tonight. My second pick. They tried making a couple movies about this, but this particular author is the guy that he's a go-to for me for what I like to call psychological schizophrenic episodes. Philip K. Dick is a science fiction writer, one of the best that ever lived, and he wrote. Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which is the basis behind Blade Runner. So there's a lot of really cool science fiction stuff there. But he also wrote a book called A Scanner Darkly, and that was turned into a movie that was it was like an acid trip. It was really, really crazily animated.
Crazy.
It's awesome. And the movie actually did a really, really good job, surprisingly good job at portraying what was actually in the book. That's one of the things, because Philip K. Dick's books are very, very unique in the way he writes. But that was like a holy crap book and movie. But the one that scared me, that freaked me out, there's one called Ubik. It's Ubik, and it's essentially what I would describe having like a schizophrenic episode or having some kind of paranoia that is, it's life controlling. It actually, one of the things I looked up when I was trying to get some information about Philip K. Dick, and it says that he was the genius fueled by paranoia and schizophrenia. From an early age, Dick battled problems determining what was real and what wasn't, and that's the basis behind this book. Is it has a science fiction end to it where there's like telekinetic powers and abilities and reading minds and stuff, but that really isn't that important for the movie or for the book itself. But this team of people is sent to the moon because we can travel back and forth to the moon quickly. And it's an ambush. This team of people get ambushed, and everybody survives, and one guy dies. Well, after all these events happen, they all get safe, and they're in a hotel and stuff. The guy that died, they're seeing his face in the coins and in money and on TVs, and he's selling this thing called Ubik, and it's just it's really, really disconcerting and unnerving, and they try to figure out what it is. Well, people in the group keep dying, and when they die, they age like the creepy guy from or like the guys in Indiana Jones when they open the Ark of the Covenant and they're basically turned dust, like skeletons that melt down to the ground. Well, that's what happens to these people. They turn essentially to dust. They age like 500 years. Well, it's happening piece by piece by piece, and nobody knows what's happening. And in the story, I mean, this is going to be a spoiler alert because my guess is most people won't read this book, but there is a thing called half-life, and if you die, they can put you in this cryogenic chamber, and they have a connection to your brain. Well, everybody in the group died in that explosion, and the guy they're seeing everywhere, he's alive, communicating to them through this little cryogenic chamber, but there's a little kid who is draining them of their life because you can only live in the cryogenic chamber for a little while, and so he's eating their he's what's turning them into dust, and time is going in reverse, and it's chaos, and it's a really intense story, and the whole thing, your brain just simply can't wrap around it, and I like stuff that challenges me like that, so it's almost indistinguishable, like I said, from a psychiatric episode, and to challenge you to like make it through it, that was utterly terrifying as far as like how well Philip was able to write that. And then upon doing research after I'd found his particular writings, he really did have major problems like that. He thought the government was chasing after him with paranoia issues and stuff. So that to me is really scary stuff, more than the blood and guts and stuff. But like I started with the blood and guts, but it's once again, just like the yellow wallpaper, it came down to the creepiness of like what the human brain does and how it falls apart and what kind of weird cognitive dissonance and stuff we can make in that.
Yeah, and if you think about it, that's all we have, right? It's just the human brain. I mean, that's all that there is to us. When we pass away and we're dead, our brain stops to function. We're not going to know the difference.
Yeah, it's off switch.
Yeah, and so you're right. That's an extremely scary thing, and to have to go through that and understand that just seems like a completely illogical metaphor. It's almost kind of like the movie The Others. I don't know if you ever saw that movie, but they all go about living their lives and this and that, and then all of a sudden, in the end, you realize, oh, spoiler alert for anybody who's never seen this.
Kids, right?
Yes, and at the end, they're all dead. It's just all ghosts.
It's like an M. Night Shyamalan twist at the end. It's like, I see dead people.
Yeah, but it's better. It's better. Sorry, it's better.
Yeah, like that kind of stuff is really cool. I like good twists and really deep thinking. That's one of the things that slasher films usually are a little bit lacking on, is like a really good quality story. So I gravitate to like slasher films that are intellectual like that. But then again, I watched the reboot for Evil Dead, where like they did a chainsaw to the face thing, where just chainsaw right down your throat, cutting your head in half and everything. I enjoyed that crazy crap too, but I don't remember that as well as I do something that was just like completely crushed. Like after you're done reading the book, like you're like, man, I gotta go sit down or watching a movie or whatever. It sticks with you for a while.
Yeah. Well, cool. Well, it's been awesome having this very lighthearted discussion. Like we've had a fun episode. And next week we're going to talk about the Michigan's legalization of marijuana in 2016. Not that it's happened, but that it's going to be put on the books. We're going to talk with John Nelson about hell and psychology, and we're going to talk with Lindsay and Keith again, as we did back when I was in Atheist Analysis, about their street epistemology and how to decompress their conversation with a Muslim. Our science segment, is going to be there is no such thing as non-GMOs. But as we leave the episode, make sure you guys go like us on Spreaker, follow us on iTunes, download. That's the best way to tell us, hey, we're doing something right. If you don't like what we have to do, make sure you send Chris Hanna an email at cellardoorskeptics@gmail.com and say, hey, Chris Hanna, you're a piece of shit. Fuck you, you asshole. And tell him what he should do better. And if you like what we do, make sure you send us an email as well. And we'll try and get your comments on the air. We did a mailbag a couple weeks ago. We can always do that again. But as we leave this segment, one of my favorite things about horror, the side of horror movies and stuff like that, is the music. I love music. Just big music fan. And I really like grindcore. Love grindcore. So there's a band called Pig Destroyer. I think we talked about this on the first episode about one of my favorite bands is Pig Destroyer. Pig Destroyer has a very horror movie-ish theme to a lot of their music. But one that stands out the most is called Natasha. It's at the end of their Terrifier album. It was a special release, something that's kind of like a short story. And that's one of the big things that I love about Pig Destroyer. You know, the lead singer kind of goes in. He has an album called Book Burner, and they have an atheist story in it. You should go check them out, pigdestroyer.com. But they have this album where they end it with Natasha. And it's basically a short horror story that I wanted to read to everybody because I found it very interesting and very, very disturbing. Natasha sits astride a white horse, stepping lightly through the wild grass and clover. Her normally dark brown hair is instead a deep red, slicked back into a bun with sticks like a geisha girl. A tattered wedding dress barely hangs on her pale, waiflish body, blackened like it's been salvaged from a house fire. She's riding through a vast rolling field, surrounded on all sides by dense forest engulfed in flame. The trees rippling like belly dancers inside the fire, never burning down, just burning. The sky is somewhere beyond the fog of violet smoke, which reeks of sulfur and burning flesh. Tiny red butterflies dart around her, leaving crisscrossing trails of crimson, like someone scribbling through the air with a crayon. Natasha comes upon a playground in the center of a field. It's a pit of sand with mangled slides and rusty swing sets, where a scrawny, raven-haired boy, about 16, is rocking back and forth, spinning the cylinder of a revolver. He's dressed in a shiny, immaculate black suit. His shaggy hair hangs down, hiding his face. The only sound Natasha can hear is a sickening creak of the chains as he swings, deafening in its isolation. The boy spins the cylinder and holds the gun under his chin. Natasha scrunches her freckled face and covers her eyes in anticipation. Click! She shudders, terrified by the sound, which seems as loud as an actual gunshot. She dismounts, feeling the grass tickle her bare feet. She kisses the horse on its head and it churns, running full stride into the burning forest. When she churns, he's holding the pistol limply to his temple, as if he were bored with it. He squeezes the trigger slowly, excruciatingly, until finally, click. Even though Natasha can't see his face, he seems almost disappointed as he spins the cylinder again. She steps into the stand, squishing it between her toes. There's only a few feet between them now, and his hair seems to be moving, shifting. She looks closer, and she sees hundreds of tiny spiders, the color of cop lights, scurrying around in his hair. She tries to speak his name, but no sound comes out. Again, she tries to speak his name, and nothing. She screams at him with all her might, and there's nothing except the clicking of the pistol's hammer and the creaking of the rusty swing. The boy places the gun under his chin again. Natasha bites her lips, tense for the shot. Click. Springing to his feet, he points the revolver between her green eyes. His elfin face is beautiful but lifeless, a pale, waxy death mask. His eyes are just hollow pits, black as ink. One of the spiders crawls out of his left socket and slowly down his cheek like a tiny blue tear. He pulls the trigger in slow motion. Bang! Natasha wakes up screaming, her heart beating like a war drum in her chest. Breathing and desperately, she pulls herself together. The pillows and the sheets are soaked in sweat and strewn everywhere. She feels something crawling up her shoulder. She wipes at it and looks to see a tiny blue spider crawling along her mattress. Shrieking, she scrambles to the bathroom and locks herself in there, curling up like a fetus on the cold tile, sniffling and crying, the smell of sulfur still lingering in her nostrils. Several hours later, and it's dusk, the horizon glowing Halloween orange. Natasha drives dark, back roads on her way to her hometown. She looks tiny behind the wheel of her dad's gigantic camouflage truck, biting at her nails until they bleed. She knows she's only a half hour from the playground. Her dad used to take her to the playground when she was like 5 or 6. But most importantly, that's where her and Stacy kissed for the first time when she was 16. She flashes back to the two of them making out in the swings, kissing, caressing, spinning round and round, tangling their chains together, rolling on ecstasy, tripping on LSD. Both dressed from head to toe in black. Her brown eyes dyed the same exact crow black as his. They look like evil twins, twin vampires, or twin Cure fans. She has the only thing that he cared about. He certainly didn't care about himself. He was diagnosed bipolar, as well as having a rare, severe case of epilepsy. He was prescribed medication for both of these, but he almost never took it, saying that it made him feel like a zombie. In his natural state, he was the furthest from that. 1 minute charming and carefree, the next minute catatonic and inconsolable. Her dad hated him, said he was a lunatic, but he was always been sweet to her, always been true, and she loved him no matter what, and her dad knew it. They were inseparable for years until her dad got promoted to major in the army and she had to move to Germany. She still thinks he took this assignment just to break them up. For 7 months, they exchanged letters religiously until one day he just stopped writing. Finally, after weeks of trying to find out what happened to him, she discovered that he cut his wrist up and almost died, and that his parents institutionalized him. Some very expensive place in Pennsylvania. Natasha got the address and wrote to him, but never received a reply. Eventually, she just gave up. Natasha comes over the mountain as night finally falls. She can see the park in the distance below and the river wound behind it. She turns down a gravel road, the trees growing over the tunnels, showing dead leaves like confetti. The gravel fades into the wild grass, and she can see the playground rusted down exactly as she did in her dream. She pulls the truck right up to it and turns off the ignition, leaving the headlights on. Then she sits down, Indian style, in the grass and starts writing in her diary, waiting patiently for something. But she has no idea what. She is in deep thought while a tiny blue spider scurries down the page. Instinctively, she heaves it away, frantically climbing to her feet. The swing starts creaking behind her, and she turns and screams at the sight of him. He waits for the echo to die out before he speaks. "So does this mean you're not happy to see me?" he softly asks. Natasha, clutching her chest breathlessly. "Sorry, that's like the 5th time today I've had the crap scared out of me. You'd think I'd be like on my toes, you know?" She pauses awkwardly. I had this dream about you last night. Good one or bad one? Not sure, to be honest. Let's say it ended with me shooting you in the face. "Well, I promise I won't do it again," Stacy grins, and almost imperturbably, menacingly buried under all his charm. He starts moving towards her, his movements elegant, deliberate, not hidden at all. "Can you forgive me, Tasha?" As he moves closer, she can see his pale torso is bruised and scratched, and there's a nasty wound on his left shoulder. Like a chunk of flesh has been ripped out of it. She's shaking, fighting to hold her ground. "What's happening, Stacy? How did you know I'd be here?" "What?" He puts his finger on her lips, shushing her. Jesus, girl, I didn't know this was going to be an interrogation. Besides, by the time you figure out what's happening, it's not going to be happening anymore. He brushed her cheek softly with his fingertips. I'm so confused. Like, I wanted you to be here. More than anything. But I didn't think you really would be, I don't know, I guess? She's speaking in sobs. Look at me. I'm crying. I don't even know why. Do you believe that I'm here right now? She nods. Cool. He sweetly smiles, kissing her forehead. She melts into his arms as a massive snowflake begins to drift down, blanketing the dead leaves white. They kiss again on the side of the truck, hands all over each other. She feels his hand under his skirt, then a finger slips inside her. Swooning in ecstasy, her eyes fall to a horrible wound on his shoulder, which is oozing a strange, radiant blue liquid. What happened to your shoulder, Stacy? She whispers, fearing for the answer. Someone bit me, he says, kissing her neck. Really, really hard as you can see. Who? She asks, unbuttoning his jeans. Someone very close to me. Before she can reply, he's sunken his teeth into her shoulder like a pit bull. Natasha can feel his tongue burrowing through her collarbone, thrashing around her ribcage, tickling her heart. When she grasps his hair to pull him off, hundreds of spiders emerge and crawl down her forearm. She's hysterical with terror, struggling in vain. Her body is going limp, her surrounding starting to spin. She feels anesthetized. She could feel the tongue in her chest and the fingers in her womb, but not the corresponding pleasure and agony. Then suddenly, with one final desperate gathering of her strength, she clamps her legs together and drops all her weight down across his arm. There's a vicious snap as his wrist breaks and a violent tear as his shoulder comes out of his socket. The crash into the ground, Stacy's head roaring back with a bestial roar. More out of anger than out of pain. His tongue pulls out of her shoulder with a sickening slurp. Natasha kicks him away, trying to get to her feet, but she just can't stand. Stacy's up on his knees, slamming his shoulder into the side of the truck, trying to knock it back in place. Finally, he does. Tasha. You know I like it rough, but come on, he says with a shattering wrist bone jutting crudely through his milk-white flesh. What did you do to me, you freak? She screams at him, covering her wound with her hand, too scared to look at it. As if on cue, Stacy's shoulder starts to tremble, and an enormous spider the size of a newborn's hand is pulled itself out of the sticky wound. It is a chemical blue as the others were, except that its swollen hide section is covered in a strange design, incredibly orientated and detailed. It crawls down his injured arm and disappears into the shadow. You should ask her, Stacy says. Maybe she'll tell you. She's never spoken a word to me. Natasha grabs the chain and pulls herself to her feet. She finally looks down at her shoulder and sees a brutal lesion about identical to his. Her strength is not only returning, but feels as if she's growing stronger by the second. Her muscles relax but poised, her vision narrowing to an amphetamine-like sharpness. All her senses are enhanced, supernatural. Stacy is staring at her intently, studying her. She can smell the fear on him. There's a long, awkward silence before Stacy and Natasha finally asks him, "So what now?" "I don't know." He seems shaken, disturbed. Now that the spider is gone, he's nervous and fidgety. I'm sorry, Tasha. I'm sorry." A thin, cherry red line of blood spirals down Natasha's leg like a candy cane. She puts her hand between her legs, starting to play with herself. His face is a portrait of confusion. She looks up at him with puppy dog eyes. "You still want to have fun, Tiger?" Stacy walks towards him slowly, apprehensively, cradling his hurt arm. She snatches him from behind his head and pulls it to her, kissing him so hard that it's painful. Finally, pulling away with his bottom lip clenched between her teeth, "I'm sorry too, sweetheart," she says softly, before wrapping the chain around his neck. She digs her heels into the sand like a tug of war and pulls with all her might, her palms painted blood down the rusted chain. Stacy gasps at the chain in panic, his breath becoming more shallow by the second until it's just a gasping wheeze. Natasha jerks fiercely on the chain, sensing the kill, and he twitches and goes limp. She lets go, and his body flops clumsily into the stand. Staring down coldly at his glassy, dead eyes, she feels unsatisfied. She walks calmly out into the grass and fetches a jagged rock the size of a brick. Then she kneels beside him and brings the rock crashing down on his head again and again. Each blow more savage than the one before it. She bludgeoned his head until it ceases to resemble a head at all. Natasha casts the stone away, her face zombified, expressionless. She looks down, and there's a giant spider seemingly staring back up at her. She lays her upturned palm in the sand, and it scurries up her arm, squeezing itself into her shoulder. She sniffs the air, catching a familiar scent in the wind, coming across the river. Slowly, gracefully, she's walking towards it, catching snowflakes on her tongue. When she finally reaches the river, she strips off her shredded t-shirt and skirt and tosses them into the snow, wading into the water in just her bra and panties. She swims across and hides in the hanging leaves of an old willow tree, with her eyes just above the water like a crocodile. The scent is getting stronger. A flashlight beam comes slashing across the darkness, followed by a timid, frightened voice calling her name. It's Peter, her ex-boyfriend from college. Natasha grins chillingly beneath the surface. Peter. Peter is spelled prey.
You've been listening to a presentation of Cellar Door Skeptics. Check us out on Spreaker. CellarDoorSkeptics.com